The cabin of the jet was quiet, but not peaceful. Passengers had just settled in when a sharp sound cut through the air. Slap. Every head turned. A senior flight attendant stood frozen in the aisle, her hand still raised. In front of her sat a man in a worn leather jacket, calm eyes, unreadable face. Steven Seagal. "You don't touch crew equipment," she snapped loudly, making sure everyone heard. "And you definitely don't stand up without permission on my jet." The word "my" echoed through the cabin. A few passengers gasped. Others instinctively pulled out their phones. No one could believe what they had just seen. A flight attendant had slapped a passenger. Steven slowly lowered his hand from the seat in front of him. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't even look angry. "I was just reaching for my bag," he said quietly. The attendant laughed, a sharp, mocking laugh. "Rules are rules. And rules aren't explained to nobodies." The cabin grew heavier with every second. Steven looked around. Businessmen in suits avoided eye contact. A young couple whispered nervously. Even the co-pilot, peeking from the cockpit, sensed something was wrong, but said nothing. The attendant leaned closer, her voice dripping with arrogance. "You think because you look confident, you get special treatment? Sit down. One more move, and I'll have you removed." Steven sat back slowly. Not because he was afraid. Because he was measuring the room. 10 minutes earlier, this jet had been nothing more than transportation. Now, it felt like a stage, one where arrogance had just crossed the wrong line. The attendant adjusted her uniform proudly and addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse the disruption. Some people don't understand hierarchy." Hierarchy. Steven's lips curved slightly, not a smile, not a smirk. Something colder. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and calmly typed a short message. "I'm on board. Handle it. No anger. No threats. Just 4 words." The attendant noticed and scoffed. "Calling your lawyer? Cute." Steven looked up at her for the first time since the slap. "No," he said softly. "I'm calling the truth." The engines hummed louder as the jet prepared for departure. But what no one on board realized was this. That plane wasn't about to take off as planned. Because when the truth landed, everything, and everyone, on that jet was about to come crashing down. The jet doors sealed with a dull thud, locking everyone inside a space where tension now floated heavier than the recycled air. Outside, the runway shimmered under the morning sun. Inside, authority was being abused, and no one dared to question it. The senior flight attendant, Rachel, straightened her blazer and walked back toward the galley like a general returning from a victory. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, each step loud enough to remind everyone who she believed was in charge. She had worked this route for years. Private charter flights. VIP clients. Celebrities who demanded silence, favors, and exceptions. Over time, something inside her changed. Courtesy turned into control. Service turned into superiority. To her, passengers were either important or invisible. Steven Seagal sat quietly in seat 3A, hands folded, eyes forward. He didn't look angry. He didn't look shaken. In fact, he looked like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. A man across the aisle leaned toward his wife and whispered, "Did you see that? She actually slapped him." "Maybe he did something wrong," the wife murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. Rachel overheard them and smirked. "Some people need discipline," she said loudly, not caring who heard. "Especially the ones who think confidence makes them special." 2 junior attendants chuckled nervously. They followed her like shadows, eager to stay on the right side of power. In the cockpit, Captain Harris adjusted his headset, uneasy. He had seen complaints before, arguments, raised voices, but never a slap. Still, protocol mattered. And Rachel had a reputation. Management trusted her. "Cabin secure?" he asked through the intercom. "All secure," Rachel replied sharply. "Minor situation handled." Handled. Steven's phone vibrated once in his hand. A reply. He didn't open it yet. The jet began to taxi slowly. Seatbelt signs flickered on. Rachel returned to the aisle, stopping beside Steven again. She looked down at him, arms crossed. "Just so we're clear," she said in a tone meant to humiliate, "this isn't a commercial flight. You don't get to move when you want. You don't get explanations. You follow orders." Stephen looked up calmly. Respect doesn't require explanation either. That word, respect, hit something raw. Rachel's face tightened. "You should be grateful you're even on this jet." A nearby passenger finally spoke up. "Miss, maybe there's no need to." Rachel turned on him instantly. "Sir, stay out of it unless you want to be escorted off as well." Silence returned. Thicker. Heavier. Stephen glanced toward the cockpit door, then back at Rachel. "You're very confident," he said. "Confidence without humility can be dangerous." She laughed again. "You sound like a motivational poster." Behind her smile, there was irritation now. He wasn't reacting the way she wanted. No anger. No fear. No apology. That bothered her more than anything. She motioned to a junior attendant. "Keep an eye on him." The young attendant nodded, visibly uncomfortable. Stephen finally opened the message on his phone. "Understood. Executives are on standby. ETA 10 minutes. He locked the screen and slipped the phone back into his jacket. 10 minutes. Rachel announced refreshments as if nothing had happened. Passengers sipped water, pretending not to watch the clock. But something was shifting. The captain slowed the jet's movement. Ground control crackled through the speakers. A delay. Unscheduled. Rachel frowned. What now? Stephen closed his eyes briefly, breathing evenly. The jet came to a complete stop. And somewhere beyond the cabin walls, a decision had already been made, one that would soon turn authority into accountability. The setup was complete. What came next wouldn't be loud. It would be final. The jet sat motionless on the runway, engines idling, as if even the aircraft itself sensed the tension brewing inside. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. A delay had been announced, but no reason given. The seatbelt sign remained on, trapping everyone in their seats, forced witnesses to whatever was unfolding. Rachel stood near the front galley, arms crossed tightly now. Her earlier confidence had sharpened into irritation. Delays were embarrassing, and embarrassment was something she never tolerated. She glanced back at Stephen. Still calm. Still silent. That calmness felt like defiance. She walked back down the aisle, stopping directly beside him again, deliberately blocking the path. "You," she said, lowering her voice but keeping it sharp. "Whatever stunt you're trying to pull, stop it. This delay isn't going to help you." Stephen looked up slowly. "I'm not pulling anything." She leaned closer. "People like you always think someone's coming to save them." A businessman 2 rows back cleared his throat. "Miss, please." Rachel spun around. "I said stay out of it." Her voice cracked slightly. "Just a little." The cabin froze. Stephen spoke again, calm but firm. "You're making this worse." Rachel scoffed. "Worse for who?" "You." She straightened and addressed the cabin loudly. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to one passenger's non-compliance, we're experiencing a delay. Thank you for your patience." A murmur spread instantly. Heads turned toward Stephen. Whispers began. Phones lifted discreetly. Stephen didn't move. He raised his eyes to meet hers. "You're blaming me to protect yourself." That landed harder than a shout. Rachel's jaw tightened. "Security will remove you if I say the word." "Then say it," Stephen replied quietly. That single sentence changed the air. Rachel hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Then pride took over. She turned and marched toward the cockpit, knocking sharply on the door. "Captain, I need security. Now." Captain Harris opened the door partway, concern etched across his face. "Rachel, what's going on?" "He's refusing to comply. He's disrupting the flight." Harris looked past her, down the aisle, at Stephen, sitting calmly, hands folded. "He doesn't look disruptive," the captain said cautiously. Rachel's voice rose. "Are you questioning my authority?" The cockpit door stayed open now. Passengers leaned forward, watching openly. Harris sighed. We're already delayed. Let me speak to him. Rachel crossed her arms. Fine. But don't expect cooperation. The captain walked down the aisle and stopped beside Stephen. Sir, I'm Captain Harris. Can you tell me what's happening? Stephen met his eyes respectfully. Captain, I stood up to reach my bag. I was slapped for it. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the cabin. Harris turned slowly toward Rachel. Is that true? Rachel flushed. He's exaggerating. Several passengers spoke at once. I saw it. She hit him. There was no warning. The captain raised his hand for silence. Rachel, go to the front. She hesitated, then obeyed, her heels no longer clicking with confidence. Harris turned back to Stephen. I apologize for this situation. Stephen nodded. I appreciate that. Harris lowered his voice. We've been instructed to hold position. Executives are requesting access. That caught Rachel's attention instantly. Executives, she snapped. For what? The captain didn't answer her. Minutes passed like hours. Rachel stood rigid, eyes darting between the cockpit and Stephen. The power she'd wielded moments ago was slipping, and she could feel it. Then a voice crackled over the intercom. Cabin crew, remain in position. Do not resume service. Rachel's stomach dropped. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't normal. Stephen closed his eyes briefly again, not in relief, but in certainty. The conflict had reached its peak, and whatever came next would no longer be under Rachel's control. The cabin had gone unnaturally quiet. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the heavy, suffocating kind that presses against your ears. The engines hummed in the background, steady and indifferent, while every human inside the jet seemed to be holding their breath. Rachel stood near the front, rigid as stone. Moments ago, she had commanded the cabin with ease. Now, she felt exposed, like a spotlight had been turned on her flaws. Her fingers clenched and unclenched at her sides as she replayed the scene in her head, searching desperately for reassurance. But none came. Steven Seagal remained seated, calm as ever. He hadn't spoken since the captain returned to the cockpit. He hadn't looked at his phone. He hadn't even shifted in his seat. That unnerved people more than anger ever could. A woman in the second row whispered, "Who is he?" "No idea," her companion replied. "But whatever this is, it's serious." Rachel overheard them and snapped, "Enough talking." But her voice lacked its earlier authority. It came out thinner, weaker. She noticed it too. The junior attendant stood awkwardly near the galley, eyes lowered, suddenly unsure which side they were on. They had laughed with Rachel earlier, followed her lead, echoed her arrogance. Now, doubt crept in. One of them, barely above a whisper, said, "Maybe we should apologize." Rachel shot her a glare sharp enough to cut. "For doing our jobs." The attendant shrank back. Minutes crawled by. Then, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed from outside the jet. The sound traveled through the cabin walls, unmistakable. Someone important was approaching. The cockpit door opened again. Captain Harris stepped out, his face unreadable. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "thank you for your patience. Please remain seated." Rachel's heart began to pound. She stepped forward. "Captain, this is getting out of hand. We need to." "Rachel," Harris said quietly but firmly, "stand by." Stand by. Those two words stripped her of control more effectively than any confrontation. Stephen finally opened his eyes and looked toward the front of the cabin, not at Rachel, but at the door. A soft knock sounded. Then another. The jet door opened. 3 men in tailored suits stepped inside, followed by a woman holding a tablet and a thick folder. Their presence alone shifted the air. These were not security guards. These were decision-makers. Rachel's face drained of color. The lead executive scanned the cabin, his eyes stopping the moment they met Stephen's. His posture changed instantly. "Mr. Seagal," he said, voice respectful, almost relieved. "We apologize for the delay." A collective gasp swept through the cabin. Rachel staggered back half a step. "Mr. Seagal," she repeated faintly. Stephen stood calmly for the first time, buttoning his jacket. "Thank you for coming." Passengers stared openly now. Phones were no longer hidden. The executive turned to the captain. "This aircraft will remain grounded until we finish." Rachel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked from the executives to Stephen, then to the stunned passengers. The hierarchy she had spoken so proudly about collapsed in real time. One of the executives addressed the cabin. "There has been a serious breach of conduct by the cabin crew. We are handling it." Rachel's legs felt weak. She tried to speak. "There must be some mistake. I didn't know." Stephen raised a hand gently. "That's enough. 2 words. Final." The executive nodded. "Sir, would you like to proceed now or privately?" Stephen glanced around the cabin, then back at Rachel, still not angry. Just disappointed. "Let everyone see," he said quietly. "Lessons work better that way." Rachel swallowed hard. This wasn't the storm yet. This was the moment just before it breaks, when the sky goes silent, the air goes still, and everyone realizes there's no escape from what's coming next. The cabin felt smaller now, as if the walls had moved in. Every passenger sat frozen, eyes locked on the scene unfolding at the front of the jet. No one whispered anymore. No one moved. This was no longer a misunderstanding, it was a reckoning. The lead executive adjusted his cufflinks and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for your patience. What you are witnessing is not an interruption. It is a correction." Rachel's breath came shallow. Her confidence, once loud and untouchable, had vanished completely. She turned to Stephen, her voice shaking. "Sir, I didn't know who you were." Stephen looked at her steadily. "That's exactly the point." The executive stepped forward again. "For clarity, Mr. Steven Seagal is not just a passenger. He is the principal owner of this aircraft and a senior partner in the airline's charter operations." The words hit like thunder. A stunned murmur rolled through the cabin. A man in the back whispered, "Owner!" Someone else muttered, "That's why." Rachel's knees nearly buckled. She reached for the nearest seat to steady herself. "Owner. This jet." Stephen nodded once. "Yes." Her mind raced backward through every word she had spoken. Every insult. Every order. The slap. She fell to her knees in the aisle. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I had no idea. Please. I've worked here for years. I didn't mean." Stephen's voice remained even. "You meant every word you said. You just didn't expect consequences." The executive gestured to the other 2 men. One opened the folder in his hands. The other held a tablet, already scrolling. "There have been prior complaints," the executive said calmly. "Disrespect. Abuse of authority. Today was not an isolated incident." Rachel looked up, panic flooding her eyes. "They're lying. I was just enforcing rules." Stephen took a slow step forward. Rules exist to protect people, not to humiliate them. He turned to the junior attendants, who stood frozen near the galley. "You followed her lead. You laughed. You stayed silent." They lowered their heads. The executive spoke again, his voice professional and final. "Effective immediately, the senior cabin crew assigned to this flight are relieved of duty pending termination review." A sharp inhale echoed through the cabin. Rachel let out a broken sound, half sob, half disbelief. "All of us," one of the junior attendants whispered. Stephen nodded. "Leadership teaches behavior. And today, the lesson failed." Rachel crawled forward slightly. "Please. I'll apologize. I'll do anything." Stephen met her eyes. "Apologies don't erase patterns." He turned to the captain. "Captain Harris, thank you for handling this with integrity." The captain nodded, visibly relieved. Stephen then addressed the passengers. "I apologize to all of you for the delay. No one should witness disrespect, especially at 30,000 feet." There was no applause. Just understanding. The executive stepped aside. "Sir, how would you like to proceed?" Stephen glanced once more at Rachel, now seated on the floor, broken by her own actions. Remove the crew. Prepare a replacement team. Then we depart. The executive nodded. Understood. As security approached, Rachel whispered one last time, I'm sorry. Stephen paused, but did not turn back. Because the reveal wasn't about who he was. It was about who she had chosen to be when she thought no one powerful was watching. The cabin doors reopened slowly, breaking the spell that had locked everyone in place. Fresh air rushed in, carrying with it the quiet finality of decisions already made. 2 airline security officers stepped inside first, their movements professional, restrained. They didn't rush. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. Authority had already spoken. Rachel remained seated on the aisle floor, eyes red, makeup streaked, her once pristine uniform now wrinkled and powerless. The junior attendant stood behind her, stunned into silence. The lead executive spoke calmly. Please follow security. One by one, the crew members complied. No protests. No arguments. Just the sound of heels and soft shoes retreating down the jet steps, each step echoing like a punctuation mark to a lesson learned too late. Passengers watched in silence. No cheering. No celebration. This wasn't entertainment. This was consequence. Steven Seagal remained standing near his seat, hands clasped behind his back. He watched the crew exit, not with satisfaction, but with resolve. Rachel paused at the door. She turned one last time, her voice barely audible. If I could go back. Stephen met her gaze. You can't. But others will remember. She nodded faintly, then disappeared down the stairs. The jet felt different now. Lighter. Quieter. Honest. Captain Harris stepped out of the cockpit and approached Stephen. Sir, I want to personally apologize. This should never have happened. Stephen shook his head slightly. You did the right thing when it mattered. Harris exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders. Replacement crew will be here shortly. Good, Stephen replied. Let's finish the journey the right way. As the captain returned to the cockpit, a middle-aged man in the third row stood hesitantly. Sir, may I say something? Stephen nodded. That took courage, the man said. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't threaten. You just let the truth speak. Stephen offered a small, respectful nod. Truth doesn't need volume. A quiet murmur of agreement moved through the cabin. A young attendant from the replacement crew soon boarded, followed by others. Their demeanor was different, calm, respectful, attentive without arrogance. They greeted passengers politely, making eye contact, offering apologies for the delay. One of them stopped beside Stephen. Sir, welcome aboard. Thank you for your patience. Stephen smiled slightly. Thank you for your professionalism. As passengers settled back, conversations resumed, but they were softer now. Thoughtful. People weren't talking about power or ownership. They were talking about behavior. About how easily authority can corrupt. About how silence, when paired with integrity, can dismantle arrogance. The engines powered up again. This time, the sound felt right. As the jet began to move, Stephen returned to his seat. He looked out the window, watching the ground slowly roll away beneath them. Captain Harris's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are now cleared for departure. The jet lifted smoothly into the sky. No drama. No applause. Just forward motion. As clouds passed beneath the wings, a lesson remained behind, etched not in anger, but in memory. Because justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, and leaves lasting change in its wake. The jet cruised steadily above the clouds, sunlight spilling softly across the cabin. Conversations had faded into quiet reflection. People stared out windows, scrolled through their phones, or simply sat with their thoughts. But no one had forgotten what they had just witnessed. Steven Seagal sat still, hands resting calmly on the armrests, eyes half closed. To anyone watching, he looked like just another passenger now. Not an owner. Not a powerful figure. Just a man traveling from one place to another. And that was the point. Across the aisle, a young woman whispered to her friend, I've never seen someone handle disrespect like that. Her friend nodded. Most people would have exploded. Stephen didn't hear them, or perhaps he did, and chose not to respond. Because real power doesn't need recognition. The lesson on that jet wasn't about money, ownership, or authority. It wasn't even about punishment. It was about something far simpler, and far rarer. Respect. Rachel hadn't failed because she broke a rule. She failed because she forgot a truth. Every uniform represents responsibility, not superiority. Authority is not permission to humiliate. Confidence is not a license to harm. When people believe they're untouchable, they stop seeing others as human. And the moment that happens, they begin to fall, even if they don't realize it yet. Stephen didn't fire a team out of anger. He didn't humiliate anyone in return. He didn't raise his voice or demand obedience. He let behavior speak for itself. That's what made the lesson unforgettable. Somewhere below, airports moved, cities passed, lives continued. On the surface, this was just another delayed flight that finally reached cruising altitude. But inside that cabin, something had shifted. People would go back to their offices, their jobs, their routines, with a new awareness. They would remember how quickly power changed hands. How silence carried more weight than shouting. How respect given freely revealed character more clearly than respect demanded. A man in the back typed a message on his phone. Be kind. You never know who you're talking to. He paused, then deleted it. That wasn't the real lesson. The real lesson was, be kind even when you think it doesn't matter. Because the measure of a person isn't how they treat those above them, but how they treat those they believe are beneath them. Stephen opened his eyes and looked out the window one last time. The clouds stretched endlessly, untouched by ego, rank, or title. He breathed out slowly. Power fades. Titles change. Wealth moves. But character follows you everywhere, onto every jet, into every room, into every moment when no one is watching, or when everyone is. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, calm and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, sit back and enjoy the flight. Stephen smiled faintly. The journey continued. And somewhere out there, someone who heard this story would pause the next time they felt powerful, remembering that true strength isn't loud, cruel, or arrogant. True strength is quiet. True respect is constant. And humility is the highest form of power. If you believe respect should be given to everyone, no matter their status, type respect in the comments. And tell us where you're watching from. Because kindness deserves to be seen everywhere.